Hello, welcome once again to our regular Saturday show here on the Phoenix Club. It is, of course, going back in time, bit of nostalgia for the retro Premier League show. I'm Josh, joined once again by Tom. Tom, looking forward to diving into this week's topic?
Really looking forward to it, man. Particularly pertinent as a Chelsea fan.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that many Chelsea fans will be sharing your sentiments towards our topic, which is, if you can't read the title of the video, unfairly sacked managers. So we're going to kick off as always. I'll give one, Tom gives one, and then we'll come back to me, back to Tom, and then some honourable mentions at the end. So I'll start off by talking about a man that had time at Chelsea, although perhaps more significantly to this topic, Leicester City, Claudio Ranieri. Now, we'll start with Chelsea chronologically. He was at Chelsea from 2000 to 2004, replacing Gianluca Vialli, taking Chelsea up into the dizzy heights of second place, which was their best finish for, 50 years? 49, I think it was at the time, since they'd last won the league. Champions League places, and well, he'd just done remarkable things with that club. He'd really turned it around, brought some brilliant players in. I believe he's the one that even signed Frank Lampard. So again, they're all-time top goal scorer there. And he was sacked by Roman Abramovich in 2004, making way for Jose Mourinho, most successful manager they'd ever had. So I guess in hindsight, we can see that the sacking kind of makes sense. But in and of itself, I think that it wasn't that fair to let him go at that moment in time. Obviously, Jose was a CL winner, but even so. But then moving on to Leicester. Well, who doesn't know the story of Leicester City? Near relegation the season before, and in fact, Nigel Pearson, their manager at the time of their near relegation, who'd managed to save them, was actually one of my candidates for this. But of course, Ranieri even more so. Taking over a side that had just avoided relegation and winning the league with them is just a remarkable story. 5,000 to 1 odds for them to win it. And the thing is, with a team like Leicester winning it, and with teams like City, United, Liverpool, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, they were never going to let a side, with all respect to Leicester, a club of that size get away with winning it twice in a row, or even getting close. So Leicester were never going to come close to even top six, really, the following season. So they had to, I think, in my opinion, the board had to realign their expectations, make them more realistic. And unfortunately, they didn't. They were expecting bigger and better things and probably Champions League glory. It didn't come, and Ranieri got the chop. And of all people, Craig Shakespeare replaced him. That didn't exactly end well.
No.
So yeah, Claudio Ranieri there for my first pick. Over to you, Tom.
Well, some comments on Ranieri first. I think he's probably the most underrated Chelsea manager we've ever had, getting us from sort of sixth place around, albeit with glory under Gianluca Vialli, taking us, as you said, up to second, record points total, I think 81, and also taking us to a Champions League semi-final, beating the Invincibles on the way to that final. And I also, further, before I mentioned Leicester, probably the nicest man in football.
Well, yeah, I think that's certainly fair to say. Yeah.
That's a debate for another day, but I think he's just such a lovely man. I don't think anyone can hate Claudio Ranieri. And I think at both Chelsea and Leicester, he identified players from Europe that neither club would have gone for otherwise, and really got the most of them. And I think at Chelsea in particular, in 03-04, he came at a really unfortunate time where he lost the league to probably the best team in English football history. Again, that's a debate for another day. But
I mean, on a quick note, it was probably his management that resulted in Roman Abramovich even buying them in the first place.
again, yep, Jesper Grønkjær, 2003, getting us into the Champions League. But regardless, my first candidate is another Chelsea boss. I mean, I have to really, as a Chelsea fan. It's going to be Carlo Ancelotti and his 2-year spell at Chelsea, being the first man to bring a double to West London, playing exciting, exhilarating football, beating teams 7-0, 8-0, 9-0, and losing his job for going trophyless the following season, despite getting us second place in Champions League football and keeping the players on board, despite losing games like 3-0 at home to Sunderland, managing to get their heads up, get them back to second place and ready to rebuild the next year. And Roman sort of gave him the chop in the tunnel at Goodison Park, which isn't great and a bit disrespectful to one of the greatest managers in modern football. But I think he's shown a lot of affection by Chelsea fans for his, as I say, his style of football was beautiful. The players in that side, Drogba, Anelka, Lampard, Terry, Cole, a fantastic team. And a feat that has never been repeated, even with the millions of Roman Abramovich.
I mean, we could certainly have a list that goes on for, I don't know, as long as we can possibly do this video for, about managers that won the league and then were sacked the following season. I mean, we've got Ranieri, we've got Ancelotti, and Wellesley I don't think we're going to mention, but even people like Mancini, I'm not a massive fan of Pellegrini, but even so, winning the league and then getting sacked a couple of seasons after that, or the season after that. So again, it's a long list of perhaps wanting too much too soon.
Antonio Conte again.
Yeah.
Arguably, I think he brought about his own downfall, but again, probably unlucky for his position. I think, but the thing with Ancelotti was the second season was by no means a nightmare. I mean, we got Champions League football. We knocked out the Champions League to a brilliant United side who made the final that season. And I think it's unlike, say, Leicester or even Chelsea under Conte or Mourinho, where there was no Champions League football and no stability. The football was the same, but the players just weren't quite as good. And that brought us second rather than first, you know?
And I think if you look at the guy that Roman replaced him with, Andre Villas-Boas, I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy. And, you know, he had relative success with Porto, a bit like with Jose, but to a lesser extent. But to bring him in and to replace a man of Ancelotti's stature with someone, again, no disrespect to him, but a small man in terms of his stature in the game with AVB, I think was a massive insult to Ancelotti. But moving on to my second choice, which is coming away really from the big guns of today, going to a Newcastle manager, a Newcastle man, in Sir Bobby Robson. Took over when Newcastle were really in the depths of despair. They'd had I say glory days. They'd had their most glorious days for a long time under Kevin Keegan after getting into the Premier League. And then after he left, they had Kenny Dalglish, who didn't really do that much. Then in came Ruud Gullit, who did even less and did more harm than good, really. Had a big bust up with captain and top goal scorer Alan Shearer. I think he was top scorer at the time, but still. And Shearer, of course, I said captain. So you got these two massive personalities in the dressing room conflicting with each other. And so Gullit, I think he ended up resigning. And instead of, as is, I guess, the modern knee-jerk reaction is to get a quick fix and get a big name, they went old school and they went for Bobby Robson, and it worked wonders. He got them from, you know, languishing near the bottom of the table. I don't even know if they'd had a win in the 98-99 season. 99-2000 season. And then it was I believe their first home game. They ended up beating Sheffield Wednesday 8-0. And so you see the contrast right away. And Alan Shearer even started performing for England again. And he ended up taking them, as I said, from the depths of despair in the Premier League to Champions League spots. And it was only because he'd finished outside the CL spots in what would be his final season that he ended up getting the boot. And I think, come on, be realistic here. You are fighting against teams like Chelsea with their new money, Arsenal who were winning the Invincibles, United who had won the title the season before, Liverpool who had gone to win the Champions League the next season. And so I think clubs had to be realistic here. And in sacking Bobby Robson when they did, not only shows the narrow-mindedness of, as it was, Freddie Shepherd back in the day, but also it's funny that only 5 years afterwards they'd get relegated. And I'm not saying that Robson's sacking was the catalyst, but I think it contributed nevertheless.
I mean, they replaced him with another kind of boring Scot in some ways similar to Dalglish in Graham Souness, who's again had a really poor spell on Tyneside. And I think, again, Actually, I say Ranieri was another candidate for the nicest man in football, but I think Robson has to also be on that list, as well as being a national hero. We could never lose the dressing room because he was just such a nice guy. I think Jermaine Genius makes an account in his autobiography about this. He's just was a fantastic coach and popular with the players. And I just can't understand why you do it, because Newcastle had no money, no real spending power. I mean, you forget it was Michael Owen who signed a couple of years later, I think a year later. It's a really, really poor decision, this one, because the other three we're going to do, you can at least look at success after they've been sacked, or at least relative success. But this one was just awful. This one, they've never hit the heights they reached under Bobby Robson again. And I think that says something about not only the man they got rid of, but the board that got rid of him.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
But on to my final candidate, and mine is another Chelsea man. Sorry for the lack of originality in this one, guys, but this is probably our pet topic as Chelsea fans. But it is pre-Abramovich. It's going to be Gianluca Vialli, who I think is very popular amongst 90s Chelsea fans, but I think perhaps maybe Abramovich-era Chelsea fans could know a bit more about. Had a 3-season spell in charge at the Bridge and went on to win the FA Cup, EFL Cup, UEFA Cup Winners' Cup and UEFA Super Cup, beating Madrid in the final. With very little money, a stadium under reconstruction, and again got us playing great football, got us Champions League qualification, and got sacked 5 games into the 99-2000 season, I believe, because of a bust-up with some key players and a row with Ken Bates. I think, given the fact that at the time he was probably the most successful manager in the history of the club.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
He must have been, because I think the one league title under Ted Drake wouldn't get him there on that. He won us European titles. I think that he really deserved to be shown more respect, because you can point to Ranieri showing great progress in the succeeding years, and he did improve the club. I'm not going to deny that. But Vialli won us so much silverware for the statue of club we were that the board really should not have sacked him 5 games into a season for that, really.
No, I think Vialli, I mean, I don't like this about him, but I think he was brave and he was very bold in being the first Premier League manager to field an all-foreign 11. The Cosmopolitan 11, I think some people used to brand it. And again, I think it opened up a can of worms, really, and it changed the Premier League for the worse. But I think if he hadn't done it, someone else would have. And so I think for him to be the first person to do that, I think it did show a great determination. But as you said, I think he did end up losing some of the dressing room, as seems to be often the case at Chelsea. I mean, looking at Jose in his second stint, Conte, again, the player power really is pertinent at Chelsea than perhaps most other clubs.
I mean, at that time, though, the club hadn't won a league in 49 years. This man had got us Champions League qualification, and the players he'd fallen out with aren't the big names we have today. I mean, albeit the only exception being Gianfranco Zola. So I just think on this one, I just think it rankles of Ken Bates having an overinflated ego, to be honest with you. And then Roman coming in after Ranieri's work, didn't exactly change mentalities, but I think he developed a much better system at the club and much more stability. And the fact that Vialli was able to navigate, as you say, difficulties at Chelsea, build all foreigner 11s, and still win the amount he did in English football is outstanding and should never be forgotten by Chelsea fans, really.
Quick question for you. Do you think that if Roman had taken over, let's say, before Vialli got sacked, that Vialli would have stayed on for much longer?
I think he'd have got more time. I don't think Roman would be sacking him 5 games into a season like that. I actually think there is player power at the club under him, but I think he would have told them to listen and would have been much more cautious about replacing him with a name like Claudio Ranieri, who at the time had never won anything major.
I mean, he replaced Jose with Avram Grant, so make of that what you will. Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, we are going to come out onto some honourable mentions that we haven't quite had the time to go to in detail on this show. So, Tom, who else would you perhaps say in your top 5, top 6 most unfairly sacked managers of the PL era?
So I'd probably go Di Matteo at Chelsea. For
It's
sure.
just a Chelsea special.
I know, right? I would then probably go Mark Hughes.
Ian Porterfield, no?
Mark Hughes at Blackburn, for sure. God, never Phil Scolari. No, terrible, terrible. But no, Mark Hughes at Blackburn has to be another.
Okay.
Possibly Phil Brown at Hull City after what he had done in that first stint.
I think Mark Hughes definitely for Stoke and Southampton. Yeah.
But at Blackburn Rovers, he got them UEFA Cup
Yeah,
football.
that's true, yeah.
And he played good football, signed big players. I don't think he was the one that got them relegated.
No, that was Steve Keane.
Yeah.
That was a long time after.
So they're probably my next 3 in there to make up my top 5.
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, Nigel Pearson's in there, of course. No one knew what was going to happen with Ranieri and Leicester after he was sacked. That was just mad. So at that moment in time, I thought, what are they doing? Why are they getting rid of the guy that just saved them? But of course, also in there, David O'Leary from Leeds, the oft-forgotten manager for sure in the Premier League era, took over from George Graham and kept Leeds consistently in the Champions League. And if it weren't for Peter Ridsdale and the Leeds board's obscure spending and austerity measures, really, I think that he was massively unlucky there. And I also had Ancelotti on my list as well. So they're the main ones for me, really. So yeah, that does round off this retro Premier League show episode, talking about our unfairly sacked managers. As always, please follow us on each of Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And there's also, of course, the subscribe button if you want to be kept up to date with all of our latest videos and content. But until tomorrow, where we talk about unpopular opinions, I'm Josh, that's Tom. We'll see you tomorrow.